like, here's Johnny, right? Something didn't feel right. I didn't know if it was time for me to get up here or not. It's like deja vu. It's like I've just been here. Well, this is going good. None of you are asleep yet, so I need to see what time it is. Emmanuel, my friend Emmanuel Doherty, he always gets 1 o'clock on the lectureship after they've eaten, and you look around and everybody's like this. So luckily you guys don't keep it warm in here or anything. Amen. I was waiting too. Well, very good. Well, this is New Year's Eve, and you know when you're young, because one of the things is when you're young, you have to be allowed to stay up till after midnight on New Year's Eve. When you're old, you're made to stay up until after midnight. No, it's good to have that kind of optimism. An optimist stays up to invite the new year in. A pessimist stays up to make sure the old one leaves. So I don't think I have any more New Year's jokes. So continue on here. Let me look at the time. I shouldn't keep you too long, but we've been in Psalm 68, and I think it's a good place to stay right now. But verse 9 says, "Thou, O God, didst send a plentiful rain, whereby thou didst confirm thine inheritance when it was weary. The congregation has dwelt therein. Thou, O God, hast prepared of thy goodness for the poor." And so in verse 9, you might say that God is a reservoir for the weary. God's mercy reigns on those who wait for it. And so it is fitting, as we go into the new year, that we continue to wait on God. God has a way of making us patient, doesn't he? Someone once told me this years ago, and I've heard it a number of times since then, don't pray for patience, you might just get it. And you might not. In the Bible, outside of ourselves. Have you ever noticed what the Bible says about patience? It says, let patience have her perfect work. I want you to think about that for a moment. It doesn't escape me that patience takes the character of a female there. I think I've learned more patience off females than anyone else in the world. But the Bible says, let patience have her perfect work. And so we've got to wait on it. Isn't that curious? You have to wait on patience. And there should be nothing new in that. But God's mercy reigns on those who wait for it. Verse 10, notice here it says, "Thy congregation has dwelt therein. Thou, O God, hast prepared of thy goodness for the poor." God is the benefactor of the beggar. He is the protector of the poor. When Jesus walked this world over on the seashore of the Galilee, he was mostly concerned himself with the poor people. I've often thought that I should do better when it comes to the poor. Years ago, I used to make it a practice of mine to just visit all of the apartment buildings. And you'd be surprised the amount of Bible studies you're able to have. And I think that we need to get back to that. Maybe this year that'll be one of the resolutions we need to make. I've made a resolution not to hang out with people this year who keep asking me about my resolution. Right? I don't want to be reminded of it. But I've got a whole list for Laura, resolutions I want her to keep. I've just quit making a list. But one of our resolutions ought to be this. We live in a community that has a number of poor people. And Jesus extended an invitation to the kingdom to them first. You ever notice that when you read the gospel? I remember when I was a boy, we went to a church. They didn't have much money, but they wanted to reach young people. And so my dad went to the junkyard and bought one of those old, I think it was a VW bus. They called them a bus, but they were just like a little van. I don't even think Volkswagen makes them anymore, do they? in Europe. So, but we got one of them. It might not have been. It might have been, but it was back from the '60s, I think. So he brought it home and fixed it all up, and we drove all over Peavine. Now Peavine is down in the middle of the woods. There isn't hardly anybody that lives there, but you go over one hill, pick up a family, go about 2 miles to the next house and pick up another family. And apparently we didn't care about the law because that VW bus would have like 20 kids in it. And I mean, it wasn't as big as my vehicle out there. I always thought it was interesting that I've got to worry about the seatbelts all the time. But on a bus, nobody wears seatbelts. You ever notice that? But we'd pack them in there, and that had a profound effect on me as a boy, seeing my dad and those other men go all over those hills, pick up these kids. When we were trying to invite people to church, we stopped at one of those houses, and they didn't have any seats in the house. They had one that sat at a little chair in the kitchen, and then they had a commode, an old commode. I remember they asked us to sit down, and I sat on the commode. But you had to go outside if you wanted a glass of water. Of course, they offered us water, and the old boy was drinking from a coffee cup. And, of course, he didn't have any teeth in. The teeth he had in were filled with tobacco. And he asked me if I wanted a drink, and I oh, okay. So he took that glass out that he was drinking with, filled it full of water, and brought it in, and I could see little black specks floating in it. Do you know what I did? I just drank it. What are you going to do? I've been in homes where when I came home, I had to take everything off on the porch because literally you'd see bugs and fleas jumping all over the place. And I want to tell you something. Those people were many times more receptive. I should say the most receptive. And we ought to think about that a lot more. It's hard to be poor and live in this county. I don't know if you've looked at rent, but I don't see how young people starting out can afford it. Joslyn lives in a place with a couple rooms. Rent's up there around $1,000. I can't believe it. It isn't worth that. But Berkeley Springs is going to be gentrified pretty soon, and all you're going to have is people from Baltimore and Washington, D.C. But that's a sermon for another day. I want you to look at verse 11. The Lord gave the word. Great was the company of those that published it. Kings of armies did flee apace, and she that tarried at home divided the spoil. You know what he's talking about here? He's talking about an army of preachers. Did you see that? That's what we need, folks. That's all we need is more preachers, right? The fact of the matter is the Lord's church does need more preachers. Do you realize we're losing over 500 preachers a year right now in the Church of Christ? I didn't even think there was that many. But we lose over 500 a year, and they're not being replaced. Students that go to school, they're going through the Bible program, but you know what they're studying to be? Youth ministers. And I have my opinions about youth ministers, but I'll tell you what we need. We need good, sound preachers of the gospel. And we're losing them. We certainly are. But here, the psalmist says we need an army of preachers. The word there in the King James is company, and it literally means an army, especially regularly organized for war. And so if you get the implication, it's a campaign, or literally an army ready to battle, a company, a host of soldiers waiting upon war. Now, when we circumspectly examine or peruse the society that we live in today, is there a war cry that's going up? Here the psalmist is saying to the church, we need a war cry. You know, it's a shame, but all through the Civil War, it was said that the Southerners would have a sound that they would make that was blood-curdling. And you remember what they called it? The rebel cry. The last man to make the rebel cry was a fellow who was being interviewed in 1913 at a gathering at Gettysburg. But he was too old to muster up enough breath to make it's kind of like when you're putting your seatbelt on, Tommy. It's hard to get that breath, right? So we've lost what the rebel cry sounds like. No one who is alive today has any idea what it sounded like. But they said it would make your blood curdle. We need to cry out today. And I don't have all the answer. I don't know how to affect society. Tom said to me this morning, I think it was Tom, was telling me about kids. I'm worried about my twins. They got to grow up in this lost and seemingly sin-filled world. And I'm afraid of how they'll be influenced. And he said, well, let them influence the sin-filled world. And I couldn't help but think, touche. It's the most profound thing I ever heard you say, Tom. Gil, did you hear me say that, how profound he is? Yes. But you know what? That's a good point. We have all these kids here now. Have you noticed that? And I want to focus on educating this group that's coming up. They need it more than anything. And let's be willing to open up our homes and our pocketbooks to do whatever we can to help them. You know, in all the years that I worked, when I had youth groups, I don't believe that we ought to be taking money out of the treasury to support a youth group. Many of you might disagree with that, and that's fine. But I never believed we needed to. And we'd go to get pizza, or we'd go to take the kids bowling, and there was always a bunch of stragglers that came along that didn't have any money, and so I'd just pay for it. And I would never say anything, but I don't remember a time that I wasn't reimbursed. And what I mean reimbursed is I didn't go with a bill. Just every time somebody saw me after one of those things, they'd come up and put $20 in my pocket or something like that for the youth group. I think we need to be serious about our youth. And working with youth isn't easy. You know, the reason I shy away from working with youth is because they're not as reliable as the older people. If you're old and you've been here a long time, I won't tell you who's old, but you're pretty reliable. The young people are sort of fickle, and it takes a lot. And so your preacher is not going to be able to do it all. We got a group coming up. Let's all decide that we're going to get behind them, work with them, and help them out. Older women teach the younger women how to love. I think the best thing we can do is try to encourage our kids to go to places where Christians are. You guys are kind of in a desert up here. There's not a lot of places where they can meet other Christians, and that's a shame. But we need to encourage it. Well, I'm running out of time. You guys don't want to hear me go on and on after eating. But an army of preachers. You know, there was a time when people used to come to churches and they would encourage the young men in the congregation to preach. Do you remember that? You don't see that very often anymore. The preaching school, I think, every year only has about one student that comes. And so people are not grooming young men to preach. I didn't realize at the time, but I was being groomed when I was young. I had no idea I was being groomed. But these men saw something, and they decided to take me, and I had an entrance. I'll tell you, I went to hear so many sermons when I was growing up. Believe it or not, there are people who enjoy sermons. I was one of them. And Laura always thinks it's funny, but when we get together, like this last week, we got together, and our family talks. That's all we do is talk. And you know what we talked about? We talked about bluegrass, coon hunting, and sermons that we heard 20 years ago. And it's about the same conversation every time we get together. By the way, we was watching on YouTube. My dad has found YouTube. It's amazing. But he could put it up on his TV, and he had Michael Cleveland up there playing the fiddle. And both my girls crawled right up to the TV and watched him play Old Joe Clark all the way through. And I have never been prouder in my life. So I got pictures of it too. Well, my girls can't be preachers, but they can certainly encourage people to preach. Girls, you can have such an amazing influence on young men. I had more young men coming to church in Freeport, Ohio than anywhere else because my daughters were teenage girls. It's amazing how many young men were coming to church then. And I thought, are they coming to hear me? Not at all. And so don't be afraid of your faith. Let it shine. Jeremiah 7:25 and verse 26 says, since the day that your fathers came forth out of the land of Egypt, unto this day I have sent unto you all my servants, the prophets, daily rising up early and sending them. Yet they hearkened not unto me, nor inclined their ear, but hearkened their neck. They did worse than their fathers. How many times has God sent the word out in this very land of ours? Notice this. Daily rising up early and sending them. Oh, when I look, 2024 is an election year. When I look at the state of affairs, I can't even recognize this country anymore. I'm pessimistic. I think it's over, folks. I think we need to put our faith solely in Jesus Christ. Stop worrying about all this politics. There's not much that we can do about it. We are blessed that we're able to vote. I want to encourage you to do all you can. But I also don't want you to get too excited or taken off guard when your vote doesn't count. That's where we live. I mean, right now they're taking Trump's name off of the ballot. You won't even be able to vote for him in half these cities. That didn't happen by accident. This stuff is going. And by the way, I'm not endorsing Trump. I'm just saying this is where we're at, and it's a shame. We need to rise up and be the influence that God has called us to be, and that's what I'll leave you with this morning. Verse 12. Well, it's this afternoon, Tommy, but it still feels like this morning. Kings and armies did flee apace, and she that tarried at home divided the spoil. This is what I want to leave you with. Who is it that tarried at home? That's the wives and the mothers. The key verse there, I think, is tarried. Let us remember mothers and wives. Someone once told me, he said, I wouldn't be here if it wasn't for my mother. Well, Captain Obvious, that's exactly right. But just imagine what we'd be without the mothers we had. I've been so blessed in my life to be around so many good mothers. But a good mother tarries at home. A good mother waits on the Lord. Abraham Lincoln said, all that I am and ever will be, I owe to my good mother. And so this year, family should be at the forefront of everything in your life. God has called men to be ministers, every man. Have you ever realized there's only a few ministers that are mentioned in the Bible? One of them is what I'm doing right here. Another is fathers. Another is the leaders of the land. Those are ordained ministers. Every father is an ordained minister by God. Let us take care of our families. Put God first in your family, and you'll succeed. Pray for an army of preachers. If we have a need tonight, this afternoon, won't you please come as we stand and sing? Whosoever hears